The warrior king, Draken Valdez, stood amidst the aftermath of victory, his armor battered, his blade drenched in the blood of enemies. The rebellion he had crushed should have solidified his status as an unshakable leader among the Galactic Coalition. Instead, it marked the beginning of his downfall. His allies, once bound to him by treaties of mutual defense, had grown fearful of his prowess. Whispers of unease spread across their ranks. They no longer saw him as a protector of order but as a threat to their fragile balance of power. As Draken led his weary forces back to their encampment, he noticed the silence of the comms, an unusual void where reports of reinforcements or congratulations would typically flow. Something was wrong. The uneasy air grew heavier when he received an urgent message from one of his scouts. The coalition fleets, his supposed allies, were moving into formation above Arion 4, their weapon systems armed and targeting his location. Confusion quickly turned to dread. "This cannot be," he muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. "We fought their battles. We bled for their peace." Yet, the evidence was clear. A coalition ambassador, projected onto his command console, confirmed his fears. The aliens spoke coldly, void of the camaraderie they once shared. "Your strength has become a liability, King Valdez. For the sake of the galaxy, your empire must be dismantled." The betrayal struck like a dagger to his heart. Before Draken could respond, orbital bombardments rained down, decimating his forces. His elite warriors fell one by one, their cries of defiance echoing across the battlefield. Draken fought fiercely, his blade carving through waves of enemy troops sent to finish the job. But even he, the greatest warrior of his age, could not hold against the overwhelming tide. As his enemies closed in, Draken activated his personal shield generator, buying precious moments to retreat to higher ground. Blood seeped from a deep gash on his side, staining the jagged terrain beneath him. He stumbled, forcing himself onward, his breath ragged and uneven. He cursed his former allies, their cowardice, and their treachery. Yet, even as rage fueled his movements, his vision blurred. The combination of exhaustion and blood loss was too much. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. From his elevated vantage point, Draken watched the coalition fleets retreat, their engines glowing against the darkened sky. They didn't even bother to confirm his death. To them, he was no longer a threat, merely another casualty of the endless games of power and politics that defined the galaxy. As his strength gave out, Draken collapsed against a rock. The silence of Arion 4 pressed in on him, broken only by the distant crackle of fires and the occasional moan of a dying soldier. He clenched his fist, feeling the coarse dirt beneath his fingers. The galaxy, so vast and full of life, had abandoned him. Left alone on this forsaken battlefield, he closed his eyes, ready to embrace the darkness. But even in the depths of despair, one thought burned brightly in his mind: vengeance. If he were to survive, it would be to reclaim what was his and to ensure that those who betrayed him would pay dearly for their treachery. As consciousness slipped away, his final vow echoed in his thoughts. They might have left him to perish, but the warrior king was not so easily extinguished. Draken's first sensation upon waking was the cold, sharp sting of antiseptic against his wounds. His body felt like lead, his vision swimming with unfamiliar faces. They were human, scavengers and settlers dressed in patchwork armor and practical clothing, their eyes a mix of curiosity and caution. He tensed instinctively, his warrior instincts flaring, but the soft voice of an older man cut through his haze. "Easy now," the man said, his weathered hands hovering near a tray of medical tools. "We're not here to harm you." Draken's gaze darted around the room, a crude shelter constructed from salvaged materials. The air smelled of oil and damp earth, and faint chatter could be heard from outside. "Why?" he rasped, his throat dry and voice weak. "Why would you help me?" A younger woman stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Because it was the right thing to do. We found you dying out there. Didn't matter who you were. Nobody deserves to be left like that." Her words struck a nerve, though Draken masked his emotions with a glare. Weakness, he thought bitterly. Compassion was a weakness his own people would never afford their enemies. And yet, as much as he wanted to reject their aid, he couldn't deny the warmth of the bandages on his wounds, the steady drip of fluid keeping him hydrated. Over the next few days, his condition stabilized under their care. The humans treated him cautiously but with surprising skill, improvising medical solutions from their limited supplies. Draken, in turn, observed them closely. They were not the towering, technologically advanced beings he was used to commanding or fighting. Their tools were primitive by galactic standards, and their settlements barely more than shantytowns. Yet, they possessed a resourcefulness that intrigued him. Despite the harshness of Arion 4, they worked tirelessly to survive, sharing what little they had with one another, and with him. At first, he spoke little, keeping his answers curt and his demeanor cold. But the humans didn't seem to mind. They treated his hostility with patience, almost as if they expected it. One evening, a small child approached him, clutching a hand-carved toy in his tiny hands. "Are you a warrior?" the child asked, his voice filled with awe. Draken hesitated, unsure how to respond. He had been called many things, king, conqueror, even monster, but never with such innocent reverence. "I was," he replied at last, his voice softening despite himself. "Once." The child tilted his head. "Why did they leave you?" The question hit harder than Draken anticipated, piercing the walls he had built around himself. He had no answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse. The boy waited a moment longer, then placed the toy in Draken's hand before running off to join his friends. That small gesture marked a shift. Draken began to see the humans not as a monolith but as individuals, each one driven by a determination to protect what little they had. He watched as they worked together to repair machinery, cook meals, and patrol their settlement for threats. They argued, laughed, and mourned openly, displaying a kind of unity that felt foreign yet strangely appealing. One night, as he sat by the fire with a group of settlers, an older woman shared her story of fleeing a destroyed colony to make a new life on Arion 4. Others chimed in, recounting similar tales of loss and resilience. When they asked about him, Draken hesitated before speaking. For the first time, he shared fragments of his own betrayal, not the specifics, but enough for them to understand the weight he carried. Their reactions surprised him. There was no judgment, no mockery, only quiet understanding. "They feared you," the older woman said simply. "Power makes people nervous. But that doesn't mean they were right to abandon you." Her words lingered long after the fire had burned down to embers. For all their simplicity, the humans possessed a wisdom born of struggle, a perspective Draken hadn't encountered in the rigid hierarchies of the galaxy's other species. As the days turned into weeks, he began to recover his strength. His once resentful silence gave way to guarded conversations, then to genuine exchanges. The humans treated him not as a king or a relic of a lost empire but as one of their own, a fellow survivor. Slowly, begrudgingly, Draken found himself respecting them in return. Yet, beneath this growing bond, a storm brewed within him. News of the coalition's occupation of his empire reached the settlement through intercepted transmissions. His people were enslaved, their culture dismantled, and their worlds divided among his former allies. Worse, the broadcasts labeled humans as unviable primitives, hinting at plans for their eradication on Arion 4. Draken's fists clenched as he listened. These people, his people, had betrayed him, and now they sought to wipe out the very species that had saved his life. The injustice was a fire in his veins, reigniting the warrior spirit he thought had been extinguished. For the first time in weeks, he felt purpose returning to him. The humans, too, were aware of the looming threat. They spoke in hushed tones, unsure of how to defend themselves against an enemy so far beyond their capabilities. Draken, overhearing their concerns, made a decision. He would not stand idly by while these people, the only ones who had shown him kindness, were annihilated. "You've given me a second chance," he told them, his voice steady and resolute. "Now I will fight for you. For all of us." In that moment, the humans didn't cheer or celebrate. They simply nodded, their trust implicit. They had saved a king, not for his crown or his power, but because it was the right thing to do. And now, that same king was willing to fight beside them, not out of obligation, but because he had come to see them as equals. The discovery of the coalition's plan to eradicate humanity on Arion 4 sent ripples of tension through the settlement. People whispered about the inevitability of their doom, but Draken refused to let despair take hold. He addressed the leaders of the community, standing tall despite his wounds. His voice carried the weight of authority and determination that had once rallied entire fleets. "You face an enemy that underestimates you," he began. "They believe your simplicity makes you weak. I see something different. I see a strength they cannot comprehend, a strength that comes not from technology but from unity and resilience." His words resonated with the settlers, igniting a spark of hope. The humans had lived under the shadow of galactic disdain for generations, but hearing their courage recognized by a figure like Draken gave them renewed purpose. The settlers began preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Tools meant for farming and salvaging were repurposed into weapons, while scrap materials were fashioned into rudimentary defenses. Draken watched their efforts with growing admiration. Their ingenuity was remarkable, even if their methods were unrefined. As he regained his full strength, Draken took it upon himself to train the settlers. His years as a warrior and tactician proved invaluable. He taught them formations, ambush strategies, and how to maximize their limited resources. At first, progress was slow. Many of the settlers had never held a weapon, let alone faced combat. But they learned quickly, driven by the knowledge that their survival depended on it. One evening, during a break from training, Draken observed a young man attempting to reinforce a piece of armor with scavenged metal. The makeshift piece looked flimsy, but the man's determination was unwavering. Draken approached and, without a word, began assisting him. Together, they improved the design, creating something sturdier. The exchange was simple, but it epitomized the growing bond between Draken and the humans. They were no longer saviors and the saved. They were allies, united by a shared purpose. Tensions escalated when an alien reconnaissance team landed nearby. The settlers were panicked, but Draken saw this as an opportunity to test their training. With his guidance, a small group of humans set up an ambush. They used the terrain to their advantage, striking quickly and decisively. The alien team was neutralized, and the settlers returned to their base with captured equipment and a newfound sense of confidence. This victory, while small, had a profound impact. It showed the settlers that they could fight back, that they weren't powerless against the coalition's forces. Draken used the moment to reinforce his teachings. "Every victory, no matter how small, is a step toward survival," he told them. "Never underestimate the power of your will." As the settlers grew more organized, Draken began devising a larger plan. He studied the captured alien equipment, identifying weaknesses in their technology that could be exploited. The humans lacked advanced weaponry, but their creativity made up for it. They developed traps, improvised explosives, and defensive measures that could delay or even repel an assault. Draken also encouraged them to embrace their unpredictability. The coalition viewed humans as primitive and predictable, but Draken knew that their unconventional tactics could be a powerful weapon. "The greatest strength of a warrior is to be underestimated," he said. "Use their arrogance against them." Despite the progress, there were moments of doubt. Some settlers questioned whether they could truly stand against such an overwhelming force. Draken addressed these fears directly. He shared stories of battles he had fought, moments when victory seemed impossible but was achieved through sheer determination. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is the choice to act despite it." Word of the settlers' preparations spread throughout the scattered human communities on Arion 4. Small groups began arriving, seeking refuge and offering to join the fight. The settlement grew into a makeshift fortress, buzzing with activity as more hands meant faster progress. Draken took time to meet each new group, learning their stories and sharing his vision. He emphasized that this wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humanity deserved a place in the galaxy. As the final stages of preparation began, Draken turned his attention to the coalition forces. He knew that they would not expect resistance on this scale, but he also understood that their response would be brutal once they realized the humans were fighting back. The settlers couldn't afford to simply defend their position, they needed to strike first. Draken proposed a daring plan to sabotage the coalition's supply lines and communication networks on Arion 4. It was a risky operation, but the settlers agreed without hesitation. They trusted Draken, not just as a leader but as one of them. He had proven his loyalty through his actions, and they were willing to follow him into the fire. On the eve of the operation, the settlement gathered for a final meeting. Draken stood before them, his presence commanding yet approachable. "Tomorrow, we show them who we are," he said. "They left me to die because they believed I was alone. They will see now that I am not, and neither are you." The settlers cheered, their voices echoing across the settlement. For the first time, they felt more than mere survivors. They felt like warriors, ready to fight for their lives and for the future of humanity. Draken watched them with pride, knowing that together they had become something far greater than the sum of their parts. The night before the attack was quiet, the kind of stillness that often preceded chaos. Draken spent the hours reviewing the final details of their plan, ensuring every settler knew their role. The coalition forces, though arrogant, were methodical and would respond quickly to any disruption. Timing and precision would be the key to their success. When the first strike came, it was swift and devastating. Small teams of settlers, led by Draken, hit key supply depots and communication outposts, crippling the coalition's ability to respond. Explosions lit up the horizon, the result of carefully placed charges that had been crafted from scavenged materials. The coalition troops, caught off guard, scrambled to regroup, but the settlers disappeared into the rugged terrain as quickly as they had appeared. Draken's strategy was clear: hit fast, vanish, and leave the enemy reeling. As the coalition's forces scrambled to regain control, Draken led a second wave of attacks, this time targeting their forward operating bases. These strikes were bolder, involving direct combat. The settlers, once hesitant and inexperienced, fought with a ferocity that stunned their enemies. Their unconventional tactics, ambushes, traps, and feints, threw the coalition into disarray. Draken was at the forefront, his blade cutting through the alien soldiers with the precision of a seasoned warrior. His presence inspired those around him, driving them to fight harder. Despite the settlers' successes, the coalition forces were vast and well-equipped. The initial victories were met with an overwhelming counterattack. Coalition dropships descended on the settlement, their weaponry leveling makeshift defenses. The settlers fell back, regrouping in the heart of their base. Draken, calm amidst the chaos, rallied them with a few decisive words. "This is their mistake," he said. "They think they've cornered us. They don't realize they've walked into a trap." The settlers had prepared for this moment. As the coalition troops advanced, they triggered a series of hidden defenses: explosives buried beneath the ground, sharpened stakes concealed in the earth, and automated turrets powered by salvaged energy cells. The attackers were caught off guard, their ranks thinned by the settlers' ingenuity. The tide began to turn, but the battle was far from over. Draken knew that the key to victory lay in eliminating the coalition's command structure. He led a small team through the chaos, infiltrating the enemy's command center. The mission was dangerous, with coalition soldiers patrolling every corridor. But the settlers had become experts at using their environment to their advantage. They moved silently, taking out guards with precision and efficiency. When they reached the command center, Draken confronted the coalition commander, a towering alien who epitomized the arrogance of the galactic elite. The commander sneered at Draken, dismissing him as a relic of a fallen empire. "You should have stayed dead," the alien taunted. Draken's response was swift and final. Their duel was brutal, a clash of strength and skill. The settlers watched in awe as Draken overpowered the alien, his blade striking the decisive blow. With the commander defeated, the coalition's forces fell into disarray. Without leadership, their coordination crumbled, and the settlers pressed their advantage. As the dust settled, the settlers stood victorious. The coalition troops that remained either fled or surrendered, unwilling to face the wrath of the humans who had proven themselves far more formidable than anyone had anticipated. Draken emerged from the command center, his armor battered but his presence undiminished. The settlers erupted into cheers, their voices a triumphant roar that echoed across the battlefield. In the aftermath of the battle, Draken addressed the settlers. His words were measured, carrying the weight of both their losses and their triumph. "You have done what no one believed possible," he said. "You have faced an enemy far stronger than yourselves and emerged victorious. This is your victory, your proof that you are not to be underestimated." He paused, letting the moment sink in. "The galaxy will hear of this day. They will know that humanity is not weak. You are survivors, warriors, and above all, a force to be reckoned with." The settlers cheered again, their spirits soaring. But Draken's work was far from over. He knew the coalition would not take this defeat lightly. They would return, and when they did, the settlers would need to be ready. Draken vowed to stay with them, to continue training and leading them until humanity could stand on its own against any threat. In the weeks that followed, news of the settlers' victory spread across Arion 4 and beyond. Other human communities, inspired by their success, began organizing and preparing for their own defenses. Draken's leadership became a beacon of hope, not just for the settlers but for humanity as a whole. The warrior king, once abandoned and left to die, had found a new purpose. Together with the humans who had saved him, he would reshape the galaxy. And so, on the barren, war-torn plains of Arion 4, a new alliance was forged, not through treaties or diplomacy, but through shared struggle and unbreakable resolve. Draken stood with humanity, no longer a king of an empire, but a leader of a people who had shown him the true meaning of strength. The galaxy would remember this day as the moment humanity proved its worth, and Draken Valis, the warrior king, became their greatest ally.